Okay, let me talk about object detection and recognition. There's a whole bunch of work that has been done in that area, but I'm going to take the bioplausible route in this particular case. And I'm going to use what's called the two-stream hypothesis that has been widely used in neuroscience. I have also referred to a couple of papers if anybody's interested in more details of such techniques. So it turns out in neuroscience, they talk about something called the two-stream hypothesis, which is a theory of visual cognition. It addresses basically the way the information is extracted by the eye and processed in the visual cortex. So it turns out that there are two streams in the brain that people talk about. One is the ventral stream, and the ventral stream is really nothing other than it's a very important stream. It basically does the recognition functionality. It requires high spatial frequency. Processing is very important. It has to go through the details of processing, and it's very object-centered. And on the other side of it, there's the other pathway is called the dorsal stream. It's guiding the functionality. Where the objects are, it's in fact in some ways viewer-centric. So these two effects, the what stream and the where stream, can be sort of like classified as, on one side of it I do recognition, and in general, eye, for example, has a particular area which is called the fovea, and we have this capability of focusing on a particular area of an image or a scene, and we can almost ignore the rest, and the rest could be almost blurred. So what I'm showing here is that when modeling foveation, the amount of details can be controlled. As an example, when you look at a stop sign, depending on my foveated region or the glimpse that I have, the areas around it I'm showing it blurred. Effectively, it's kind of like changing the focal length. We don't, we can't change the focal length of the eye much. But anyway, it's kind of like that I can focus on a particular area of this scene, and I can analyze it. Now, on the other side of it, there's also something called the saccades of the eye, which are the rapid eye movement. And this is a seminal experiment that was done a long time ago, where an example illustrating the eye movements within just 2 seconds of observation, showing where this particular person was observing and where the focus points were. Now, using this, dorsal stream and the ventral stream, and the idea of using foveation and saccades, one can potentially build a recognition system, right? So to that effect, as an example, one has to first think about the where stream, the dorsal stream. Now, in this particular case, as you can see, that there are 3 objects of interest, and the objects of interest are basically the cat, the human, and the dog. Now, what one can do, and again, there are different ways of doing that. In this particular case, we have a global context network, which basically figures out the objects of interest. And in this particular case, as I said, there are 3 objects of interest, and based on those objects of interest, I can actually, minimize the details, have the proper resolution, and using lower resolution, I figure out the objects of interest. And then what one can do is they map back it to the to that full image that I have, which is in this particular case, maybe an HD image, and I mark my points of interest. Now, also remember that I don't have to do it this way. In general, if I give a scene and if I ask a human to figure out, hey, in this scene, can you find out if there are 3 cats? We actually, in a lot of cases, do random saccades. Right? We move from one object to another and try to figure out where these 3 cats are. So it can potentially be random, but in our cases, in this particular case, we actually also used a global context network to show the points of interest. It doesn't have to be that way. The next thing that is important is that once I know the points of interest, then I can try to figure out what those objects are, and that is basically based on the glimpses that I have. So if my glimpse size is somewhat like this, as in this particular case, I'm showing the cat's ear, what one can now do is my network then figures out in some ways that, hey, based on these, it seems, I'm priming my network, it seems that it's kind of like a cat ear. Now, if it's a cat ear, then obvious thing to do is to move down and right my glimpse, right, to find out if I can find the cat's, cat's eyes. And then I can go down and try to figure out the cat's mouth or the whiskers. So now that's basically every time I'm priming my network and really trying to figure out where my cat's, the full cat lies, so to say. And then at the end of it, when I actually go further down, I figure out, hey, that's basically my cat's face, and this is indeed a cat. So that's how I can process effectively, depending on the kind of network that I have. Potentially I can do processing with a much more effective way. And to that effect, using such ventral and dorsal system, using such a dorsoventral network, so to say, what one can do is one can come up with object detection and recognition. So in this particular case, taking an example, what one can do is one can take an object, original image, and then what one can do is process this image by dividing into grid cells and then having different fixation points, which are the glimpses. And based on those fixation points, you can grow it to find out if the object that I'm looking for, or if at all there is an object of interest there or not. So in this particular case, if my starting point is what I'm showing in the green, in one of those grid cells, I find that that's nothing which is important. I mark it as something not important. I go somewhere down at the bottom. Again, that's not important. I mark it as red. Then I go somewhere here, and I'm doing it in this particular case in a random fashion, and I can say I find something, I find the mouth, I grow it, and at the end of it, I find the human face. On the other side of it, it's very similar to the next one. At 10 by, I can randomly do that saccades, and then finally figure out, hey, where the objects of interest are, and then finally find the bounding box that I'm really interested in, the object of interest. So this is something that is, again, following what we humans do, doing basically both foveation and saccades, building a framework called Falcon, which uses both foveation and saccades to detect objects. So what I'm really showing here is on that y-axis showing the foveation, and I can foveate or have glimpses at different parts. I may or may not find something interesting in each of those cases, but then I go and do a different saccade or a different points of interest or fixation point that I start with, and then lo and behold, I find something important, and I find that particular bird. So that's basically the idea. It has, various, effectively what it can actually do is it can reduce my computation a lot and do the processing so that it's quite similar to what we do. Now, the second thing is also important, and I'm not showing it here, is that if you do it this way, it's difficult to fool the networks. Turns out in a lot of cases, the adversarial images gets fooled due to the background in a lot of cases. Turns out that if you do foveation and saccades, one can show that these networks are a lot more robust and difficult to fool. It's not that you can't fool them, but it's difficult to fool. We also tried it on for the fun of it. We actually tried foveation and saccades, this network, on a bunch of of images pertaining to my students, and this is what you end up seeing, that hey, in all these cases, we can not only find the object, we can detect the object of what is we are looking for. Now, this is actually kind of interesting. Using foveation and saccades, what we found is that standard deep learning cannot do. Now, if you look at this image, it's an optical illusion. It's a question, of course, depends on where my glimpse starts. I'm either going to see it as a rabbit or as a duck. So it turns out that this duck-rabbit optical illusion, at any particular time, if your focus starts, for example, on the right side of it, and you grow your glimpses, you're going to see it as a rabbit. However, if you start on the other side of it and grow your glimpses, you're going to see basically a duck. You will never see a duck and a rabbit at the same time, which the standard deep learning is going to get always fooled, right? However, in this particular case, you're either going to see a rabbit or a duck, depending on where your fixation points are and how you start. So to that effect, this is an example of these optical illusion that we did. We explored this alignment of our method with human perception using a variation of the optical illusion that I showed in the previous one. And this is basically, again, an input image. Let's say the starting point is that point which is shown on the left, the fixation point, and you can grow the fixation points. The glimpses are growing as I'm showing on the right side of it, and beyond a certain point your network now gets primed into understanding that this is indeed a duck. Now if I go on the other side of it, if my fixation point starts here and I start growing my network, or rather start growing my glimpses based on that. And again, my network gets primed properly so that now in this particular case, as I'm showing on the right side of it, you come up with the right bounding box, you stop at a particular point and say, hey, this is a rabbit. So this is something which is kind of interesting, I thought, because now going beyond and really considering the kind of things that human vision does, it's possible not only to do, for example, object detection, but it's difficult to fool, which otherwise much easier to do, for example, in a standard deep learning system.